The mosaic was discovered in 1961 during construction of a parking garage in Pompeii. Workers thought they'd found decorative tiles. Then, the archaeologist arrived and started brushing away volcanic ash, and the image emerged, piece by piece, a gladiator, standing over a woman, her wrists bound, and around them, a crowd watching, not fighting, not killing, something else, something the archaeologist photographed quickly before officials sealed the room and declared it too obscene for public viewing. For 40 years, that mosaic stayed locked away, but in 2003, a British researcher named Dr. Margaret Stratford got access to the sealed archives, and what she found in the unpublished records, letters, fragments, graffiti that had been deliberately excluded from official excavation reports revealed a systematic practice so disturbing that Roman authorities themselves tried to erase it, not because they thought it was wrong, but because acknowledging it openly would admit that gladiatorial games weren't just about combat, they were about something darker. Tonight, we're going to follow one woman. Her name was recorded in a fragment found at Pompeii, Claudia. She was captured during a raid in Germania, sold to a lanista in Rome, and on March 15th, 79 AD, 6 months before Vesuvius erupted, she was brought into the Colosseum as a prize, not to fight, to be won. And what happened to her in the 6 hours after the games ended, documented in graffiti, mentioned in fragments of letters, hinted at in mosaics that were quickly destroyed. That's what Rome spent centuries trying to hide. Before we descend into her story, subscribe, because once you know what really happened to women like Claudia, you'll understand why every piece of evidence had to be fought for. Now let's go back to March 15th, 79 AD, to the moment Claudia realized that dying in the arena would have been mercy. March 15th, 79 AD started like any other games day in Rome. 50,000 people flooded into the Colosseum before dawn, jostling for seats, buying wine and bread from vendors, settling in for a full day of blood sport. The morning would be executions condemned, criminals thrown to beasts. Midday would be animal hunts, exotic creatures killed for entertainment. And afternoon would be the main event, gladiatorial combat. But there was one addition to the day's program that didn't appear on any official schedule. Between the animal hunts and the gladiator matches, there would be an auction, not of slaves in the normal sense, of female prisoners who'd been designated as victory prizes, women who would become the property of whichever gladiator won his match that afternoon. Claudia stood in the hypogeum, the underground maze beneath the arena floor, with 17 other women, all captured, all between the ages of 14 and 30, all stripped of the clothing they'd been wearing when taken, and dressed instead in thin white shifts that left nothing to imagination. A slave overseer, a man whose job was processing arena prizes, walked down the line inspecting each woman. Not for health, they were inspected for that when first brought to Rome. This inspection was different. He was checking for visible scars, missing teeth, signs of disease that would reduce their value. 3 women were pulled from the line. Arena floor, he said simply. Those 3 would be executed during the morning damnatio ad bestias, too damaged to be valuable as prizes. The remaining 15, including Claudia, were valuable enough to be worth keeping alive, which meant they faced something worse than the quick death of being thrown to animals. They would be given to gladiators. And what gladiators did with their victory prizes, that's what we need to understand. Let me explain something that Roman historians hate admitting. Gladiators weren't just fighters. They were sex symbols, rock stars. Women from every social class fantasized about them. Graffiti found at Pompeii includes messages like Celadus the Thracian makes the girls sigh, and Crescens the net fighter, doctor to nighttime girls. Nighttime girls, euphemism for what gladiators did after hours, but consensual encounters with wealthy women who could afford to bribe their way into gladiator barracks were one thing. What happened to female prisoners was something entirely different. The practice started sometime in the late Republic, around 50 BC. A lanista owner of a gladiator school realized he could increase profits by offering complete victory packages to gladiators who won important matches. Not just prize money, not just laurel wreaths and freedom from one more fight, but a woman, a captured prisoner, as property. The practice spread because it solved multiple problems for Roman authorities. First, what do you do with female prisoners who have no ransom value? They can't fight as gladiators. Roman crowds found that distasteful, except in rare novelty matches. They can work as household slaves, but the market for slaves was flooded after every military campaign, and feeding prisoners who weren't generating revenue was expensive, so making them gladiator prizes monetized them. The Lannister would purchase female prisoners from military camps for cheap, maybe 50 to 100 denarii per woman. Then they'd offer them as prizes to gladiators fighting in sponsored games. The gladiator who won got the woman as property. He could keep her, sell her, do whatever he wanted. And here's the darkest part. The crowd knew. The auction that happened between morning executions and gladiator matches wasn't hidden. The women would be paraded onto the arena floor. A herald would announce which gladiators were fighting that afternoon and which woman each one was competing for. The crowd would cheer or jeer based on the women's appearance. It was entertainment, spectacle, and it made the afternoon gladiator matches more exciting because now warriors weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for a prize the crowd could see, evaluate, fantasize about claiming themselves. Claudia was 22 years old. She'd been born in a village near the Rhine River, in territory that would later be called Germania, but that Romans considered barbarian frontier. Her father was a tribal leader, not a king, but important enough that his household had status. She'd been engaged to be married to a warrior from a neighboring tribe. The wedding was set for harvest season. Then the Romans came. It was a punitive raid. Retaliation for some border skirmish Claudia's tribe probably hadn't even been involved in. Roman auxiliaries swept through the village at dawn, killed the men who resisted, captured everyone else. Claudia's father died fighting. Her younger brother, only 12, was killed trying to defend their mother. Her mother was too old to be valuable, so she was killed too. Efficient brutality, economic calculation, disguised as military necessity. Claudia was valuable, young, healthy, attractive by Roman standards, tall, blonde, the exotic barbarian, look that Romans found fascinating. She was shackled with 40 other young women and marched to a Roman fort, then to a holding camp, then loaded onto wagons for the long journey to Rome. The journey took 6 weeks. 6 weeks in chains, minimal food, no privacy. By the time they arrived in Rome, half the women from her village were dead disease, exhaustion, some from simply giving up. Claudia survived, and when they reached Rome, she was sold to Quintus Silvanus, a Lannister who specialized in providing arena entertainment beyond just gladiator matches. He owned 50 gladiators training at his ludus in Capua, and he had contracts to supply female prisoners to games across Italia. Claudia spent 3 months in his holding facility, fed just enough to maintain appearance, taught a few Latin phrases, yes, master, please, master, mercy, master, and told what would happen to her, that she'd be brought to games, paraded for crowds, given to a gladiator if he won. What happened after that was up to him. The only mercy she could hope for was that the gladiator who won her would be kind, or at least quick. March 15th, midday. The morning executions had ended. The arena floor was being raked smooth, blood and bodies removed. Claudia and 14 other women were led up through the underground passages, through the gate of life that gladiators used when entering the arena. 50,000 people watched them emerge. The women walked in single file, wearing white shifts, barefoot, on sand, still damp with blood. Some of the women wept. One collapsed and had to be dragged. Claudia walked with her head up because her father had taught her that dignity couldn't be taken, only surrendered, and she refused to surrender the only thing she had left. The herald, a man whose voice could reach every tier of the Colosseum, announced each woman, from Germania, captured in the Rhine campaign, 22 years old, unmarried, inspect and bid. The crowd responded. Men shouted evaluations. Women in the upper tiers laughed or looked away, uncomfortable with the spectacle but not uncomfortable enough to leave. Some made bets on which gladiator would win which woman. The auction wasn't about money. The women had already been purchased by the Lannister. This was about assignment, about matching each woman to a specific gladiator fight, about creating narratives that would make the afternoon matches more compelling. Claudia was assigned to the fourth match of the day. A veteran gladiator named Marcus, a Murmillo who'd survived 32 fights, would face a younger Retiarius. The winner would receive Claudia. The herald made sure everyone understood. The barbarian woman with golden hair. Prize to the victor. Let the better man claim his reward. The crowd roared approval. This is what entertainment looked like in Rome. This is what 50,000 people cheered for. Not just combat, but the promise of what came after. The women were led back underground to wait, and up above, the gladiator matches began. Claudia couldn't see the fight. She was kept in a holding cell beneath the arena, listening to the roar of the crowd, unable to tell what was happening. Was Marcus winning? Was the younger fighter? Did it even matter? Both were killers. Both would claim her as property. Both would do whatever they wanted. She tried to remember prayers her mother had taught her, to Germanic gods Romans didn't acknowledge, gods who maybe couldn't hear her, this deep in Roman territory, this far from home. Another woman in the cell, younger, maybe 16, asked Claudia in broken Latin, "What will happen to us?" Claudia didn't answer, because she knew. The overseer had explained it with bureaucratic precision when they'd first arrived. After a gladiator won his prize, he had 6 hours. 6 hours before he had to report to his quarters at the Ludus. 6 hours to do whatever he wanted with his prize, wherever he wanted. Some gladiators took their prizes to private rooms in the Colosseum's underground. Some took them to nearby inns that catered to gladiators. Some did what they wanted right there in the holding cells, while other prisoners watched. And what they wanted, the overseer hadn't given details. Didn't need to. The women understood. Up above, the crowd's roar changed tone, from the general noise of watching combat to the specific scream of a finishing blow. Then cheers. Sustained. Someone had won. Marcus or his opponent. Claudia would find out soon. 2 minutes later, the cell door opened. The overseer pointed at Claudia. "You, come." She stood. Her legs shook. The younger girl grabbed her hand, held it briefly, then let go. Claudia walked out of the cell, down a corridor, up steps, into a prep room where gladiators waited between matches. And there, washing blood off his arm, was Marcus. He'd won. He looked at Claudia, not with lust, not with cruelty, with the flat assessment of a man evaluating property. "Can you clean wounds?" he asked. His first question. Not her name, not where she was from, whether she had medical skills. "Yes," Claudia said. The truth was, she didn't know, but yes was the only answer that might delay what she knew was coming. "Good," Marcus said. "Come." Marcus led Claudia through the underground warren of the Colosseum to a small room barely more than a closet that gladiators used for storing equipment and treating injuries between fights. He pointed to a gash on his shoulder where his opponent's trident had caught him before Marcus drove his gladius through the man's throat. "Clean it," he said. Claudia had no supplies. Marcus handed her a flask of wine and a relatively clean cloth. She poured wine over the wound. Marcus didn't flinch and pressed the cloth against it until bleeding slowed. The silence was unbearable. Marcus finally spoke. "You're thinking I'm going to rape you." Direct. Brutal. But oddly, not threatening. Claudia didn't answer. "I'm not," Marcus said. "Not today. Maybe not ever. Depends." This was new information. Not what she'd expected. Not what the overseer's explanations had implied. "I've survived 32 fights," Marcus continued, while Claudia wrapped cloth around his shoulder. "You know how? I don't waste energy. Don't get drunk before matches. Don't fuck the night before fighting. And I don't do stupid shit that gets me killed." He looked at Claudia directly now. "Your property. My property for the next 6 hours. Then I'm supposed to decide if I'm keeping you or selling you. But here's the thing. I'm fighting again in 3 days. Another veteran match. High stakes. And I'm getting old for this. 38. That's ancient for a gladiator. My reflexes are slowing. My shoulders hurt every morning. And I'm probably going to die in the next year. either in the arena or from infected wounds after. "Why are you telling me this?" Claudia asked. First full sentence she'd spoken. Marcus shrugged. "Because I need something different. Not a woman to rape today and sell tomorrow. I need someone who can keep me alive, clean wounds, prepare food that isn't poison, maybe know some barbarian medicine tricks, and in exchange, I don't touch you. You work. I protect you. We both survive longer." Claudia stared at him. "You're offering me employment." "I'm offering you better odds than the alternative," Marcus said. "Most gladiators who win prizes treat them exactly how you're imagining. Use them until they're broken, then sell them cheap. I'm offering you a job. Dangerous. Probably short, because I'm probably dying soon. But better than being passed around." Claudia made a calculation. Trust him, or assume he was lying. And this was just elaborate cruelty. She chose trust, because the alternative was unbearable. "I know about wound poisons," she said. "My mother was a healer. I can make infection less likely, and I can cook, if you have ingredients." Marcus nodded. "Then we have a deal, for now." He stood. "Come on. We've got 6 hours before I have to report you to the Lanista. Let's see if you can actually keep me alive long enough to make this arrangement worth it." They made it 4 hours. 4 hours where Claudia started believing maybe she'd found the one gladiator in Rome who wasn't a monster. Marcus took her to a small apartment he rented near the Ludus, let her wash, gave her real food, showed her his collection of wounds, dozens of scars, some poorly healed, and asked her assessment. She told him honestly. 2 infections brewing, one that would probably kill him if not treated. She made a poultice from herbs she convinced a shopkeeper to sell her, using Marcus's money. Applied it to the worst infection. Marcus watched her work with professional appraisal. "You're actually useful," he said. "Most prizes are just." He didn't finish. Didn't need to. Claudia worked in silence. When she finished, Marcus paid her. Actually paid her. 10 denarii. "That's yours," he said. "Start saving. Maybe buy your freedom eventually." It was the first moment of genuine hope Claudia had felt since being captured. And then there was a knock at the door. Marcus opened it. Another gladiator stood there. Younger, scarred, grinning. "Heard you won the German girl," the man said. His Latin was rough, accent suggesting he was from Thracia originally. "Came to see if the stories are true." About barbarian women. Marcus's expression changed. The professional neutrality vanished. Something else replaced it. He looked back at Claudia, and she saw in his eyes that everything he'd said, every promise, every arrangement, was about to become meaningless. "She's working," Marcus said to the Thracian, but his tone was wrong. Not protective. Negotiating. "Come on," the Thracian said. "Brothers share, right? Lannister's rules. You know how it works. Prize belongs to the winner, but tradition says you don't keep her locked up the whole 6 hours. Let the others see what you won." This was news to Claudia, and apparently news to Marcus's promises. Marcus hesitated. Claudia saw calculation in his face. He could refuse, defend his property, but then he'd violate gladiator code, make himself unpopular in the Ludus, possibly get killed in his next match because other fighters wouldn't watch his back, or he could agree. And everything he'd told Claudia would be revealed as lies. He'd been kinder than most. But kind didn't mean good. It just meant he'd delayed the inevitable to get useful work out of her first. 5 minutes, Marcus said to the Thracian. Claudia felt her stomach drop. "Then Gaius wants a turn. And Marcus from the other Ludus heard you won her, and he's coming over." The Thracian stepped into the room. Marcus didn't look at Claudia. The deal was over. She'd been stupid to believe it. And now she understood what the next 2 hours would be. What happened in the next 2 hours isn't described in official Roman records, but it's documented in graffiti, in fragments of letters between gladiators, in Christian polemics written by critics of the games, in archaeological evidence from rooms beneath amphitheaters where they found chains bolted to walls and scratch marks from fingernails digging into stone. The practice was called victory sharing. Gladiators at the same Ludus, especially those who fought as a unit in group matches, shared prizes. Not out of kindness or brotherhood, out of economic reality. A gladiator could die any day. Today's winner might be tomorrow's corpse. So winners shared prizes with other fighters because next time they might be the ones asking for a share. It was insurance, social bonding, and entertainment. Between 7 and 14 gladiators cycled through Marcus's apartment that afternoon. Some stayed 5 minutes, others longer. Claudia stopped counting after the 5th, stopped processing what was happening. Her mind separated from her body, a survival mechanism. She was present, but also absent, watching from somewhere else, feeling pain, but not processing it. The archaeological term for what she experienced is dissociative state. The clinical term doesn't make it less horrific, just gives historians a way to talk about it without admitting what they're describing. Marcus stood by the door the entire time, making sure each gladiator paid him 2 denarii for access, making sure no one damaged Claudia too badly, she was still his property, and damaged property had less resale value, making sure no one took longer than their allotted time. He was a businessman, managing an asset, protecting his investment, not protecting her. The distinction matters. When the 6th hour approached the deadline, when Marcus had to report Claudia back to the lanista, the last gladiator left. Marcus handed Claudia her white shift, told her to put it on. She did, mechanically. "You did well," Marcus said. "Professional assessment. Like she'd completed a job. I'm keeping you. You'll clean wounds and cook. And when I win other matches, we'll do this again. Fair?" "Fair." The word hung in the air like poison. Claudia didn't respond. She couldn't. Her voice had stopped working somewhere around the 3rd gladiator. Marcus took her silence as agreement. They walked back to the ludus as the sun set. Marcus reported to the lanista that he was keeping Claudia as permanent property. The lanista recorded it in his account books. German girl, approx. 22 years, assigned to Marcus Mamillo. Purchase price 75 denarii. Now property of fighter. Value estimated 100 denarii due to medical skills. That's how Rome recorded it. Neat. Economic. No mention of what had actually happened in those 6 hours. No documentation of victory sharing. No acknowledgement that this wasn't an isolated incident but standard practice. Because here's what historians discovered when they started actually looking. This happened constantly. After every major gladiatorial event in every amphitheater across the Roman Empire. The evidence exists in fragments that survived accidentally because they were too mundane to destroy. Graffiti at Pompeii. Flamma, gladiator, name, shared his prize with 8 brothers, good times. Account books from a lanista in Capua listing female prisoners with notes like damage during victory celebration, reduced value. A letter from a wealthy Roman woman to her brother complaining that gladiators at his ludus were using female prizes so roughly that resale value drops by half. The writer wasn't complaining about the rape, she was complaining about the economics. That's what survives. But the official histories? Silent. Why? Because acknowledging this practice openly would require admitting several uncomfortable truths. First, that gladiatorial games weren't noble combat between warriors, but included systematic sexual violence as reward system. Second, that female prisoners had no protection under Roman law. They weren't even afforded the minimal protections that Roman slave women had. Third, that crowds knew. Spectators watched the auction, understood what winning meant, cheered for gladiators who were fighting for the right to rape, and didn't object. Fourth, that this wasn't a few bad gladiators. It was structural, built into the games, economically rational, socially accepted among gladiators as legitimate perk of the profession. Claudia lived with Marcus for 3 months. She cleaned his wounds, cooked his food, and after each of his matches he fought 3 more times in those months. She was shared with other gladiators. It became routine, predictable, almost mechanical. Wake up, prepare food, clean equipment, wait to see if Marcus won his match. If he won, prepare for the afternoon of victory sharing. If he lost, watch him die, and wait to see who claimed her next. Marcus lost his fourth match, took a trident to the stomach, died slowly over 2 days while infection spread. Before he died, he sold Claudia to another gladiator for 60 denarii, less than he'd paid. The damage had reduced her value. The new owner, a secutor named Titus, kept Claudia for 6 weeks. Same arrangement, same pattern. Then he died too. Gladiator mortality rates were catastrophic. Most didn't survive 2 years. Claudia was transferred to 5 different gladiator owners in 3 months. Each one used her exactly the same way. Medical care, cooking, and victory sharing after matches. By June 79 AD, Claudia had been in Rome for 6 months. She no longer looked like the woman who'd been captured in Germania. Her hair had turned partially grey, stress-induced at age 22. She'd lost 20 pounds. Her hands shook constantly. The psychological term is complex PTSD. The contemporary Roman term was broken. Gladiators started refusing to claim her as prize. Too damaged, not attractive enough, not healthy enough. Her value had dropped to 20 denarii. Finally, she was sold to a brothel that specialized in exotic barbarians. A different kind of exploitation, same systematic nature, just different clientele. And then Vesuvius erupted, August 24th, 79 AD. Pompeii was buried under 20 feet of volcanic ash, including the brothel where Claudia was working. Her body was found in 1961 during the parking garage excavation. Archaeologists could tell from her skeleton that she died violently, not from the volcano, but from blunt force trauma to the skull, probably received days or weeks before the eruption. Someone had killed her, probably a client, possibly an owner who decided she wasn't profitable anymore. Her remains were catalogued as unidentified female, aged 20 to 25. Found in brothel, evidence of extensive trauma. That's how she was recorded. A statistic, not a person. Not a woman who'd had a father and a brother and a wedding planned. Not someone who'd survived 6 months of systematized horror that Rome preferred not to document. Just unidentified female. The mosaic I mentioned at the beginning, the one showing a gladiator standing over a bound woman with crowds watching, was sealed by Italian authorities in 1961. Why? The official reason was protection of cultural heritage, sexual imagery not appropriate for public display. The actual reason was more complicated. Italian scholars in the 1960s were still invested in the myth of Roman glory. Rome as pinnacle of civilization, law, order, culture, acknowledging that gladiatorial games included systematic sexual violence as rewards would complicate that narrative, make it harder to celebrate Roman achievement without acknowledging Roman atrocity. So the mosaic was sealed, along with dozens of pieces of graffiti that referenced victory sharing, along with fragments of letters discussing female prizes, along with any archaeological evidence that suggested systematic rape was built into the games. This isn't conspiracy theory. Dr. Margaret Stratford's 2003 research documented it explicitly. She found catalogues from the 1980 excavations at Pompeii listing artifacts that were never published, never displayed, filed under inappropriate sexual material or offensive graffiti, and stored in archives that researchers couldn't access without special permission. When she finally got access, she found account books from Laniste listing female prisoners as prizes with valuations, letters between gladiators discussing sharing arrangements, graffiti boasting about how many men had celebrated with a particular prize, medical texts from Roman physicians describing how to treat injuries sustained by arena prizes, injuries that were specifically sexual trauma, legal documents from a court case where a lanista sued a gladiator for damaging prize property beyond repair. All of this existed, was excavated, and was hidden because acknowledging it would force a reckoning with what Roman civilization actually was. Claudia wasn't unique. She was one of thousands. Let's look at the numbers. The Colosseum could hold 50,000 spectators. Gladiatorial games were held approximately 10 to 12 times per year in Rome, plus many more in amphitheaters across the empire. Each games day featured multiple matches. Not every match included a female prisoner as prize, but enough did that the practice was standard. Conservative estimate: 100 to 200 female prisoners per year were used as gladiator prizes in Rome alone. Multiply that by the hundreds of amphitheaters across the empire. Multiply by the 350 years that gladiatorial games were popular. Roughly 250 BC to 100 AD at peak, continuing in reduced form until 400 AD. We're talking about tens of thousands of women, possibly hundreds of thousands, all experiencing variations of what Claudia experienced. Some were killed immediately. Some survived and were sold into brothels. Some, very few, were ransomed by families or charitable organizations. Most just disappeared from historical record. No names, no graves, no memory. We know about Claudia only because she died at Pompeii and volcanic ash preserved her skeleton. We know about some practices because graffiti survived. But for every Claudia whose remains were found, there were 100 whose bodies were thrown in mass graves, or cremated, or simply left to rot. The absence of evidence became evidence of absence. Historians assumed that because official sources didn't mention female prisoners as gladiator prizes, it must not have been common, must have been rare, must have been exaggerated by Christian critics who wanted to make Rome look bad. But archaeological evidence tells a different story. When you actually look, when you excavate brothels and find skeletons with trauma patterns consistent with prolonged sexual violence, when you analyze the bones and find markers of malnutrition and stress, when you find iron rings bolted into walls in rooms beneath amphitheaters, the picture becomes clear. This was systematic. This was normal. This was how the Roman entertainment industry functioned. Here's the question we need to ask. Why did Rome hide this? Not from us, they didn't know we'd be analyzing their trash 2,000 years later. Why did Romans hide it from themselves? Why isn't this practice described openly in Roman texts? Why the euphemisms, the silence, the deliberate non-documentation? Because acknowledging it openly would require Romans to admit they weren't civilized, that their games weren't noble athletic contests, that they were participating in systematic sexual violence as entertainment. And that admission would crack the foundation of Roman identity. Romans believed they were superior to barbarians, more lawful, more just, more civilized. The games were supposed to demonstrate Roman values: courage, strength, discipline. If the games also included gang rape as standard reward for victory, then Romans weren't superior, they were just powerful. And power isn't the same as civilization. So Rome created a shared fiction. Gladiators received prizes. Audiences knew vaguely what that meant, but didn't discuss specifics. Official records documented economic transactions: this prisoner sold to this gladiator for this price, without mentioning what happened between purchase and resale. Christian critics tried to expose it, but they were dismissed as biased, exaggerating to make paganism look bad. And the practice continued for centuries, hidden in plain sight. Everybody knew, nobody said. The same mechanism exists today. How many systematic abuses exist in our society that everyone knows about but nobody officially acknowledges? How many industries have built-in exploitation that we pretend not to see because examining it too closely would force us to admit we're complicit? Rome teaches us that civilizations can commit atrocities while maintaining narratives of nobility. That systematic horror can be normalized when it's economically profitable and socially accepted. That victims can be erased not by destroying all evidence, but simply by refusing to look at the evidence that survives. The mosaic that was sealed in 1961 was finally displayed publicly in 2018. After 57 years, after every scholar who might have been embarrassed by it was dead. After enough time had passed that acknowledging the truth couldn't damage anyone's reputation. You can see it now if you visit the secret cabinet at the Naples Archaeological Museum. It's displayed with a small plaque explaining that it depicts victory celebration after gladiatorial combat. The plaque doesn't use the word rape, doesn't explain that the woman is a prisoner. doesn't mention that what's being depicted was systematic practice, not isolated incident. Even now, even with all the evidence, the label is sanitized. But you can see the truth in the mosaic if you look. The woman's face, the gladiator's stance, the crowd watching. What was being celebrated? What was being normalized? What was being rewarded? Claudia died in Pompeii 2,000 years ago. Her skeleton was catalogued, studied, and reburied. There's no marker, no memorial, no acknowledgement of what she endured. But her story survived in fragments. In graffiti she probably never saw. In account books that recorded her as property. In archaeological evidence that shows the truth, even when official histories lie. We know her name only because one fragment of a Lanista's account book survived, listing Claudia Germania, age approx. 22, sold to Marcus Mermillo for 75 denarii. That's all. That's her entire historical legacy. 75 denarii. But knowing what happened to her, knowing what happened to thousands like her, knowing that Rome built part of its entertainment empire on the systematic exploitation of female prisoners, and then spent centuries hiding it, that matters. Because the horror isn't just what was done. It's that entire civilizations convinced themselves it was acceptable, and that, ultimately, is the true, surviving lesson from the arenas. Not the glory of the empire, not the courage of the combatants, but the terrible, enduring power of a lie. The power to look at a woman's face in a mosaic, to see the proof of a life destroyed, and to officially, publicly, label it a victory celebration. History is rarely a simple record of facts. It is a constant battle against sanitization. It is the fight to ensure that our shared fiction, whatever it may be today, does not finally triumph over her truth. If you believe that the people erased by history deserve to be remembered, if you want us to keep digging through the silence and challenging the official narratives of the past, then please take 1 second right now to subscribe to this channel. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss the stories Rome or any empire tried to bury. We will continue to fight the lie. Thank you for watching.